Major changes are happening in terms of research outputs globally. In this video, we analyze research outputs by country over time. As always, we consider data, not feelings. All data sources are available for free. We consider the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, so this data source focuses mostly on outputs and citations. Then we use World Development Indicators, which are covered in other videos. In particular, we want to obtain relative measures. So we adjust for population size. Then we look at the Nature Index, which again focuses on outputs, on publications. And then we look at other measures of innovation, including patents. As always, the link to my GitHub is down below in the description. I will also upload some raw data if you want to explore the data yourself. There's a major shift happening in terms of academic outputs, and you see a significant increase in the case of outputs from Chinese institutions. Now this figure looks at the percentage, is about the relative importance of outputs of each country. And for a long time, which is not a big surprise, the US dominated scientific outputs, accounting for more than 27%. But within a short period of time, we talk here about 20 years, this picture has changed quite tremendously and China is taking over. And you also see a steady increase in the case of India, in particular in the last years. Now the key question is this trend sustainable? Would we expect this to increase going forward? What is the main driver? So when we consider outputs or other quantities, very frequently it's useful to look at relative measures, such as quantities compared to GDP or population. And when you do this, so when you adjust for population and you express scientific outputs per 1 million people, the picture is quite different. So what you observe is that it is quite stable in most developed countries. You see a little bit of an impact here because of COVID, but you have an initial increase and then it stabilizes at a certain level. And then you see this tremendous change in the case of China and in the last years also India, that mean that research intensity is going up. So looking at the output per 1 million inhabitant, China is doing significantly better, but you see there is still quite a bit of potential compared to other countries. So put differently, it is quite likely that the share of outputs in the case of China, but certainly also in the case of India, is likely to go up further over time. So put differently, the trend we saw in the previous slide is likely to continue. Now the other issue, of course, is quality. End of the day, you can always say, well, they get lots of quantity, but what about quality of outputs? Now measuring quality, again, is not straightforward. People look at citations. Of course, citations are a little bit tricky. You have self-citations and there are lots of issues with it. But I would say it's a reasonable but rough measure of quality of outputs. So this chart looks at the share in the top 1% of outputs based on citations. So for a long time the US dominated and almost had a share of 2%, so actually was doing relatively well when it comes to high impact outputs. But lately you see a decline. Again, one has to note that the data is only available up to 2020. We are now in 2025, so there's quite a bit of a delay. So most likely this trend has continued. In the case of other countries, you see more or less stability, like in European countries, but also in Japan. But you see a significant improvement of quality based on this measure in the case of China, but also India. And this seems to continue over time. Of course, again, I stress there are limitations when it comes to using citations. So what's the conclusion here? Most likely, these major shifts in scientific outputs are here to stay. They are not necessarily size-driven alone, they are also driven by research intensity, and there's still quite a gap in the case of China, but certainly India. So most likely going forward, you will see a more significant emergence. Indeed, the quality has improved as well, so it's not only about quantity, which actually is an important message. So the other issue is you have outputs, scientific outputs, but do they actually translate into innovation? Now again, innovation is not that easy to measure. You can look at product development, but many people also look at patents, because patents give you a more precise idea about the link between having a research idea and then using it in products. Of course, some of the patents are never used, so there are other issues with it, there are certain strategic decisions and so on. In short, China is doing exceptionally well. India is significantly behind when it comes to patents, but there are various other reasons that are at play. So finally, the interesting question is what happens to the flow of international students and academics? So will these people follow? It's quite likely, and you see already changes happening. We spoke in other videos a little bit about the international student market and current challenges, in particular for UK institutions, but it's likely to happen. And you see certainly in the case of China that Chinese institutions are attracting more and more foreign students, but also foreign academics. So you can follow the links to explore the data yourself. I always recommend that. In particular, if you want to go more into patents, this is a very useful website with links to additional data sources. So that's all for this video. I see you in the next one.